Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about one of the most haunting, elusive, and downright chilling enigmas in the entire Warhammer 40k universe. The Black Ships. They're not grand battle barges or crusading flagships. They don't fight glorious wars or carry noble warriors. No, the Black Ships are something far darker. They drift silently through the void like obsidian leviathans, unmarked, uncelebrated, and unspoken of in polite imperial company. When they arrive in orbit, planets fall silent. When they land, people disappear. And when they leave, nothing is ever quite the same again. These are not vessels of hope, they are instruments of fear. The very sight of a black ship can chill a planetary governor to the bone and make ordinary citizens fall to their knees in panic and prayer. And you know what? That fear is completely justified. Because the black ships don't come to save, they come to take. They harvest Psykers. In a galaxy where psychic power is both a divine gift and a terrible curse, Psykers are walking time bombs. And the Imperium, in its desperate, brutal logic, has only one answer for how to deal with them. Gather them, silence them, and use them. But the methods, the methods. That's where the nightmare begins. So if you've ever wondered what secrets travel aboard these labyrinthine vessels, what happens behind those sealed black hulls, what fate awaits the unfortunate Psykers taken from their homes, and who truly commands these ghost ships of the Imperium, then buckle up. This isn't a story of heroism. It's a story of control, horror, and the price of survival in the grim darkness of the far future. There's something about the Black Ships that feels more like a ghost story than a military operation. Among fans, they've always carried this air of silent dread. These ships aren't just tools of the Imperium, they're omens. The way they're talked about in lore is subtle, almost reluctant, like even the in-universe chroniclers aren't entirely comfortable discussing them. And maybe that's what makes them so chilling. They're not openly revered like the God Emperor's palaces or feared in the same bombastic way as Chaos warbands. No, the fear surrounding the Black Ships is quieter, more insidious. It creeps up on you. When most players or fans first encounter the concept of the Black Ships, it usually comes with a sort of double take. Wait, there are actual ships that just go around abducting Psykers? That realization alone shifts the tone of the entire Imperium. We always knew it was brutal, sure, but this is cold, calculated terror at an industrial scale. These ships aren't legends in the way a Primarch is a legend. They're more like the whispered tales you hear in dark corners of lore, barely more than a rumor unless you go looking. But once you find them, once you know, they stick with you. Descriptions of them are sparse, but consistent. Massive, void black vessels, sleek and silent, bearing no heraldry save for the occasional aquila or the grim symbols of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. They don't need banners. Their shape alone is a threat. There's a reason they're almost never seen in battle reports or heroic sagas. They aren't part of the glorious machinery of war. They're part of something else, something older, more controlled, more secretive. One fan once described them in a forum post I'll never forget as imperial ghost trains that ride the stars filled with the damned. That hits harder than any data sheet or rulebook entry ever could. And it's not just creative metaphor. In many ways, the comparison holds. These ships appear, seemingly from nowhere. They stop at imperial worlds, often without warning. A day later, they're gone, along with anyone touched by the warp. Families don't get explanations. Planets don't receive formal apologies. The administratum just marks the ship's arrival in cold, bureaucratic language, and life goes on. But for those taken and those left behind, nothing is the same again. A lot of fans speculate that this is intentional, that the Imperium wants people to be afraid of these ships, not just because fear keeps Psykers hidden and compliant, but because it reminds the wider population of the danger within. Of how thin the line is between human and heretic. Psykers are always one misstep away from becoming a demon's plaything, and the Black Ships are the Imperium's way of quietly, mercilessly keeping that danger in check. Some even say it's a form of ritualized horror. The ships are part of the Imperial cult's doctrine of fear. The Emperor protects, yes, but only if you're obedient enough to deserve his protection. Others take it further, wondering if the ships themselves are more than just transport vessels. There are old rumors, mostly fan-driven, but they've gained traction over the years, that the black ships are ancient technology, older than the Imperium itself. Relics of the dark age of technology, perhaps, reconfigured by the Telepathica into something useful. There's no solid proof, but some of the descriptions in older texts mention arcane systems and non-standard propulsion signatures. Things that don't entirely line up with regular Imperial design. And that just adds another layer of mystery. A lot of the black ship's terror also comes from what we don't see. There's very little media, official or fan-made, that explores their interiors in any detail. And that silence? That's loud. It makes you imagine the worst. Metal corridors lined with sealed cells, chambers of null energy, cold and suffocating. Psykers strapped into chairs, sedated or worse, fully conscious but silenced by Sisters of Silence or psychic inhibitors. It's easy to imagine them not even being treated like people anymore. Just inventory, just dangerous cargo. And the scariest part is, that's probably not far from the truth. In fan art, they're often depicted almost like funeral barges, huge, slow, surrounded by black stars or ghostly warp light, with no living figure in sight, just the ship and the terrible knowledge of what it carries. That imagery sticks with people. You won't see many players saying, "Oh, I want to build a black ship army." Because it's not that kind of fascination. It's the kind that gnaws at the back of your brain. The kind that whispers, "This is what happens when fear becomes policy." And maybe that's why they fascinate me so much. In a universe where gods walk among mortals and planets burn in endless war, the black ships still manage to be some of the most disturbing entities out there. Because they're real. Quietly, mercilessly real. They don't need daemons or Xenos horrors to be terrifying. They're terrifying because they exist. Because someone, somewhere, thought this system made sense. And because no matter how far you run in the Imperium, you can never really be sure they won't come for you. To really understand why the black ships even exist, you have to dig into one of the deepest, oldest fears in the Imperium. Psykers. Not chaos, not Xenos, not even heresy. Psykers. The very concept of a human wielding power drawn from the warp terrifies the Imperium more than most people realize, and with good reason. The warp isn't just another dimension, it's a living, chaotic, unpredictable nightmare realm. When someone draws power from it, no matter how trained or noble their intentions, they're essentially opening a door to hell and hoping the thing on the other side doesn't notice. And the truth is, most Psykers don't control it. They get overwhelmed, possessed, shredded from the inside out, or worse, turned into gateways for demonic incursions. One unstable Psyker on a hive world can mean the deaths of billions. That's not exaggeration. That's recorded history. So when people ask, why such harsh measures? Why black ships? I can't help but think, have you seen what happens when the warp breaks through? The fall of the Eldar started with psychic excess. The Horus Heresy was manipulated by warp entities. Entire sectors have vanished into demonic storms because one Psyker lost control. In a galaxy like this, where the veil between reality and madness is razor thin, Psykers aren't just dangerous, they're existential threats. That's where the paranoia starts. And in classic Imperium fashion, that paranoia becomes policy. The black ships weren't born from malice alone, they were born from survival instinct, sharpened into steel. They're the result of humanity learning again and again that unregulated psychic power leads to annihilation. So what do? You take the Psykers. All of them. Young, old, weak, strong, it doesn't matter. You round them up and remove the threat before it blossoms. But here's where it gets really twisted. The Imperium doesn't just fear Psykers. They need them. Astropaths, navigators, battlefield Psykers, even the Emperor himself functions through immense psychic force. It's a contradiction baked into the very foundation of the Imperium. They're harvesting that which they hate, depending on what they fear. It's almost poetic in its horror. That's what makes the black ships such perfect symbols. They're not just collection tools, they're paradoxes in motion. Silent, massive contradictions drifting through space, capturing humanity's own children to be silenced, sacrificed, or shaped into tools. There's something so grimly efficient about it, so depressingly logical. No speeches, no trials, just a cold sweep of the population and a swift departure. And let's not forget how widespread this fear really is. On most Imperial worlds, being discovered as a Psyker is a death sentence, or worse. Families hide children showing signs. Villages offer them up like cursed offerings. On more religious planets, they're burned outright. And honestly, most people support the black ships. Because when the alternative is demons ripping through the sky or an entire city falling into a warp rift, fear wins. Every time. I've talked to a lot of fellow fans about this, and there's this running theme in our discussions, the sense that the Imperium's treatment of Psykers says more about them than the Psykers themselves. Like, what does it mean that humanity's response to the unknown is always control and culling? Why does the first instinct have to be a prison ship, and not education, not integration? And then you remember, this isn't a hopeful setting. It's Warhammer. The idea of nurturing psychic talent is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. Not when the stakes are so high. Not when one wrong move means a demon prince walking through your capital city. One theory I've always found compelling is that the black ships are part of a wider psychological strategy. Not just for gathering psychers, but for keeping the rest of the population terrified and compliant. You see a black ship in orbit, and you remember your place. You remember that the Emperor's gaze sees everything. It's fear, not hope, that keeps the Imperium stable. The Ecclesiarchy knows this. The Inquisition definitely knows this. And the black ships? They're fear made manifest. It's also worth pointing out how early the system was put in place. The Great Crusade was still ongoing when the seeds of the black ships were sown. Even then, the Emperor knew what unchecked psychic power could do. The Council of Nicaea, the Thousand Suns, the repeated disasters caused by rogue psychers, it all fed into this. The black ships are the culmination of centuries of mistakes and compromises. They're not a fix. They're a containment unit for a galaxy-spanning disease. And in the end, maybe that's why they're so terrifying. Because the Imperium isn't wrong. Psychers are dangerous. The warp is hungry. The black ships are necessary. That's what makes them so tragic, so nightmarish. They're not the monsters. They're the response to the monsters. And in trying to protect humanity from the warp, the Imperium became something just as terrifying. There's something about the arrival of a black ship that feels more like a planetary calamity than a scheduled visit. And maybe that's the point. It's not a docking maneuver or a routine administrative event. It's an omen. For the people living on Imperial worlds, especially the more isolated or religious ones, the appearance of a black ship in orbit is the moment everything changes. You could be going about your day, praying in a chapel or working in a manufactorum, and then someone looks up at the sky and sees it, this vast matte black shape hanging silently among the stars. No lights, no signals, no announcements, just presence. And the silence that follows it is often louder than any alarm. From what we know, and honestly from what we imagine, because the lore is so deliberately vague, the process is terrifyingly systematic. The black ship arrives. Communications with local authorities are minimal, sometimes non-existent. The administratum might receive a cold, encoded message hours beforehand, giving them barely enough time to prepare. But even then, prepare usually just means ensuring a list of suspected psychers is ready and that local enforcement won't interfere. It's not a negotiation. The black ship doesn't ask. It takes. Then comes the sweep. Teams from the ship descend, sometimes with full detachments of Adeptus Arbites, other times escorted by Sisters of Silence, their presence cutting off psychic senses like a dead zone. There are stories, haunting ones, about how entire hives go silent for hours during these sweeps. Buildings locked down, streets cleared. Families forced to remain indoors while squads move from sector to sector. Anyone with a psychic signature, no matter how faint, is extracted. And it's not clean. It's not some clinical, quiet operation. We're talking about children torn from their homes, old men dragged from chapels, women screaming for their sons as black armored figures vanish into the fog. Some of the most disturbing depictions in fan lore describe the Psyker roundups as something between a witch hunt and a harvest. No one really wants to talk about it, because deep down, everyone knows it could be them next time. On some worlds, it's even ritualized. That part really gets to me. There are planets where the arrival of the black ship is treated like a grim holy festival. Psyker candidates are gathered voluntarily. Well, voluntarily in the loosest sense. Families dress them in ceremonial robes. Priests offer last rites. Entire communities gather to watch them be taken away. And everyone pretends this is a noble thing. a sacrifice for the Imperium. But it doesn't take much reading between the lines to see the fear behind those ceremonies. It's not pride, it's resignation. They know what happens to most Psykers, they just don't say it aloud. There's also this really eerie part of the process that fans often fixate on, the silence of the crews. The agents who work for the black ships rarely speak. They don't explain. They don't justify. They move like machines, efficient and merciless. And that silence? It's what sticks with people. A lot of fan interpretations suggest it's intentional, that the psychological impact is part of the process. The fear, the confusion, the helplessness, it all serves a purpose. It makes resistance seem futile. And when you're dealing with psychic threats that could explode into warp breaches, you don't leave room for hesitation. Some of the more chilling theories suggest that not all Psykers taken are even on any official list. The black ships can sense psychic potential, even the latent kind, and act accordingly. There are countless stories, some fan-made, others hinted at in lore, of clean citizens being taken anyway. Maybe they had a dream they couldn't explain. Maybe they accidentally read someone's thoughts. Maybe they just felt too much. The black ship doesn't need proof, it decides. One of my favorite, or rather most haunting, pieces of lore comes from a short story where a young boy hides in a ventilation shaft as the black ship agents tear through his hab block. He watches, silent, as they take his older sister. She'd always been a little strange, always seemed to know things before they happened. And even though no one ever confirmed she was a Psyker, the agents didn't care. They took her anyway. The boy survived. But at the end of the story, he whispers to himself, "I see colors when I close my eyes." And that last line? That's the fear. That's the cycle. The black ship will be back. And honestly, that's what makes this entire process feel so fundamentally terrifying. It's not about justice. It's not about fairness. It's about containment. It's about numbers. The Imperium doesn't have the luxury to coddle potential Psykers or investigate them with nuance. It just gathers them. It removes them like tumors. And the people left behind? They learn to pretend it never happened. Because talking about it is dangerous. Talking about it might make the black ship come again. There's a thread I once read on a fan forum that described the black ship process as the slowest apocalypse. Because for the Psykers, it is the end of the world. Their world. Everything they knew is gone. And for the rest of the planet, it's a warning. A reminder. The Emperor is watching, and if you ever so much as think too loudly, the sky will open and the silence will come for you. And in the end, that's what makes the black ship collection process so unforgettable. It's not the violence, it's not the efficiency, it's the atmosphere, the dread, the feeling that you are never truly safe, that somewhere out there, drifting through the stars, is a ship with your name already written in the manifest. You just don't know it yet. If there's one thing the lore keeps maddeningly vague, it's what really happens to the Psykers once they're aboard a black ship. And I get it. That mystery is half the horror. The other half is what we can piece together. And honestly, it's bleak. You'd think the worst part was being taken from your home, maybe ripped from your family, but no, that's just the beginning. The real nightmare begins when the hatch closes behind you and the ship pulls away from the planet. After that, there's no more sky, no more freedom, just silence, darkness, and waiting. Most sources agree that the inside of a black ship is more prison than starship. It's built for control, not comfort. The Psykers are kept in cells, small, featureless, designed to suppress emotion and sever contact. And I don't mean metaphorically. These aren't just isolation chambers, they're null chambers. Damped, stripped of warp resonance, some of them even lined with psychic insulating materials. I once read that certain ships use blank technology or even house Sisters of Silence in key control points just to keep the ambient psychic pressure from boiling over. Because imagine it, thousands of Psykers, terrified, unstable, and bleeding raw emotion into the warp. That's not a ship, that's a beacon for daemons. So suppression isn't just for discipline, it's survival, and this is where the fan theories really start to spiral. We've heard whispers in the lore, tiny scraps about what the conditions are like, but fans have filled in the gaps with chilling detail. Some describe it like an asylum floating in space, where Psykers scream for days until they go mute. Others imagine long corridors of cells stacked atop one another like a human hive, with guards or servitors patrolling in total silence, responding only when a Psyker breaches containment or dies. The most unsettling take I've seen? A fan theory that each Psyker is tagged not by name but by utility potential. Not Maria from Belladon, but Batch 17 subtype empathic potential class Delta. It's dehumanizing, and that's the point. Feeding and hydration? Automated. There's no kindness, no caretaking. They're livestock. Dangerous, warp-touched livestock that need to be kept alive long enough to serve their purpose. Most probably never see a human face again until they reach Terra. Maybe not even then. There's a passage in one Black Library novel where a character reflects on the inside of a black ship, describing it as an oubliette for the mind. That line stuck with me. An oubliette isn't just a prison, it's a hole you're meant to disappear into, forever. And it makes sense. Psykers aren't supposed to get through the journey in one piece. The Imperium doesn't want survivors, it wants instruments. If they break along the way, that's acceptable. Collateral damage. Some are even expected to die en route, either from stress, psychic overload, or testing. Because yes, that's another fan-driven horror, the idea that some ships run evaluations mid-voyage. Not to help, but to sort, to separate those worth keeping from those destined for the pyres. And about those tests, this is where things get really dark. It's theorized that the Adeptus Astra Telepathica uses the journey time to perform trials, examining the Psyker's tolerance, resistance, potential for training, not through written exams or interviews, but through pain, through isolation, through controlled exposure to psychic stimuli, or even psychic predators caged for this exact purpose. I've seen fans call it the Crucible, as if it's a rite of purification. Only a fraction of Psykers survive it. Fewer still remain sane. Those who do are either said to be trained as sanctioned Psykers or fed to the Golden Throne, and we'll talk about that later. Another grim possibility that pops up in community discussions is that the black ships don't travel with just Psykers. Some fans believe they carry clean staff too, handlers, guards, tech priests, and that these personnel live in separate zones of the ship, completely cut off from the Psyker cargo. But here's the twist. The longer the voyage, the more of those handlers start to break down. Exposure. Psychic bleed. Even the best damped systems can't suppress everything. So after months of warp travel, even the crew start seeing things, hearing things. There are stories about crew members vanishing, suicides in the airlocks, or entire sections of the ship being sealed off mid-voyage without explanation. Maybe it's all superstition, or maybe not. And let's not forget what happens when containment fails. Because despite all the safeguards, all the damping, sometimes Psykers break through, they snap. And when that happens inside a black ship, it's like setting fire to a barrel of gunpowder. There's at least one mention in older lore of a vessel lost entirely to a warp breach, after a chain Psyker exploded into a full-blown possession. The crew tried to jettison his section. Too late. The entire ship vanished, screaming into the immaterium, never seen again. That's why the Sisters of Silence are there. Not for ceremony, for execution. It's almost ironic. The Imperium builds these ships to protect itself from the Psykers it fears, and then loads them full of unstable, terrified Psykers and hurls them into the warp for months. It's like strapping a nuke to a candle and hoping it doesn't ignite. I've always thought that if there's one story I'd love to see told in more detail, it's this one. The view from inside the black ship. Not from a guard or a high-ranking Telepathica official, but from a Psyker, someone mid-journey. Someone trying to hold on to their identity while everything around them screams for silence. Imagine the slow unraveling, the claustrophobia, the cold metal walls that never speak back. The realization that even if you survive this journey, you probably won't remember who you are when it ends. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what the Imperium wants. Not Psykers, but vessels. Not humans, but tools. And the black ships? They're the forges. Silent, monstrous forges drifting through the stars, breaking down lives so they can be reforged into weapons, or into fuel. Here's the part that hits the hardest. After everything, the terror of the abduction, the silence of the black ship, the mental torture of the voyage, most of the Psykers don't make it out the other side. Not in any way that counts. Because once they arrive at Terra, there's no moment of freedom. No reunion, no answers, There's only sorting, selection, and sacrifice. The fate of these Psykers is sealed long before the ship even reaches the Sol system. And that fate? It's horrifying, but also somehow utterly necessary. This is where the Golden Throne comes in, the Emperor's seat, the most sacred relic in the entire Imperium, the thing keeping humanity alive, and the biggest consumer of human life in the galaxy. That's not an exaggeration. The Golden Throne doesn't just hold the Emperor's withered body, it eats Psykers. About 1,000 per day, give or take, every single day. Thousands of Psykers are sacrificed to sustain the Emperor's psychic beacon, the Astronomicon. Without it, warp travel becomes blind, chaotic, and almost certainly suicidal. The Imperium, this massive, rotting galactic empire, literally cannot function without this single light in the warp, and that light runs on souls. It's hard to wrap your head around it. 1,000 a day. That's more than 300,000 Psykers every standard year, all gathered by the black ships, all processed, all used. It's the most industrialized sacrifice in the history of humanity, and most people in the Imperium don't even know it's happening. Or they know just enough to accept it and never ask questions. Because to question this system is to question survival itself. There's a reason people in-universe whisper about the black ships like they're the ferrymen of the damned. Because they are. The majority of the Psykers they collect will never be trained, never be sanctioned, never even leave Terra again. They'll be led down into the catacombs beneath the Imperial Palace and offered up, sometimes ritually, sometimes mechanically, to the Golden Throne. And the kicker is, most of them don't even understand why. They just know it's the end. Some are given drugs to dull the fear. Others are kept conscious, forced to feel the last moment of their soul being devoured in service to a god who never speaks. And yes, some of the Psykers do survive the sorting. The Imperium does need sanctioned Psykers. Astropaths, battle Psykers, mind scribes, interrogators, all critical to the functioning of its bloated bureaucracy and endless wars. These survivors are trained, broken in more methodical ways, and bound into Imperial service for life. And even they live under constant suspicion, constant threat of purging. Because in the eyes of the Imperium, a Psyker is a weapon, one that might explode at any moment. The fact that some are spared doesn't mean they're free. It just means they've been pointed in a different direction. But let's not pretend the numbers are anywhere close. For every Psyker who gets trained, hundreds are burned. Some fans estimate that only 1 in every 100 survives to become a functional asset. The rest are fuel. And I don't mean that metaphorically. Their essence is literally drained to sustain the Emperor's spirit. It's not even a dignified end, it's consumption. You are biomass, psychic meat for a machine that can't be turned off. There's a lot of debate among fans about the morality of this system. I've had long, passionate arguments with people who insist that it's the only way. That if the Astronomicon goes dark, the Imperium collapses and chaos floods the galaxy. And honestly, they're probably right. But there's something uniquely soul-crushing about the fact that humanity's survival depends on the daily murder of its most gifted individuals. These are people with potential, real, rare, often beautiful potential, and they're being harvested like crops. Others argue that this wasn't always the way, that maybe if the Emperor had taken a different path, had not shut down the Council of Nicaea, had embraced Psykers instead of fearing them, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't need the black ships. But that's all hypothetical now. The throne is failing. The Emperor's will is flickering. And instead of reform, the Imperium doubles down. It needs Psykers. Not to elevate, not to celebrate, but to grind into paste and pour into the engine of a dying god. Some older texts hint at even darker truths. That certain Psykers are held back, experimented on, pushed to extremes to see if they can fuel more than just the throne. That the Imperium might be trying to build better fuel. That terrifies me more than anything else. The idea that someone, somewhere in the bowels of Terra, is trying to quantify the soul, to make it burn longer, brighter, more efficiently. That's not science, that's soulcraft, and it reeks of desperation. There's also this undercurrent in the fan base, a kind of resigned bitterness, that humanity never learned from its history. We know what the dark age of technology looked like. We know how dangerous unchecked power became. And instead of evolving, instead of rising above that fear, the Imperium built an empire of sacrifice. A meat grinder. And the Psykers, they're just the latest gear in that machinery. But I'll say this, if you really want to understand the black ships, if you want to grasp why they're so feared, it's not because they steal people. It's because we know where they're going. Because the moment that ship changes course toward Terra, the fate of everyone on board is locked in. You're not going to training. You're not going to a better life. You're going to feed a god. And the worst part? That god needs you. Not for salvation. Not for grace. Just so humanity can limp along one more day. And that, to me, is the deepest horror in all of Warhammer. Not the daemons, not the heretics, but the idea that we've reached a point where the only way forward is to burn the brightest among us, again and again, forever. If you've ever wondered why the black ships seem to move like shadows through the galaxy, appearing in orbit without warning, vanishing just as suddenly, skipping past warp storms like they're nothing, it's because they follow a completely different set of rules from the rest of the Imperium's fleet. And the key to that mystery lies with the navigators. Or, more specifically, the way they aren't fully in control of the black ship's routes, at least not in the way you'd expect. These vessels don't just traverse space, they thread it, weaving through the warp with a level of precision and ritual that borders on the arcane. Most Imperial vessels rely on navigators from the Navis Nobilite, genetically modified mutants who can see into the warp and guide ships by the light of the Astronomicon. That's already strange and dangerous enough. But the black ships? They're different. Everything about their movement is shrouded in secrecy. There are rumors, some in official material, others whispered through fan communities, that their navigators aren't standard, that some of them are blindfolded, not in a literal sense, but ritually cut off from the Astronomicon during certain jumps. They navigate by something else, by psychic resonance, by pain, or as one chilling theory puts it, by the screams of the Psykers aboard. That sounds like fan fiction until you really start thinking about how these ships operate. Their cargo is volatile, their missions are high risk, they can't afford warp exposure in the traditional sense, because a single wrong vibration, a single brush against the demonic, and the whole ship could erupt into a psychic implosion. So they don't just use the warp, they negotiate with it. Every jump, every passage is calculated to an extreme. There are patterns, timings, even celestial alignments that need to be observed before a black ship enters the warp. And the rituals? They're intense. From what's been pieced together, most black ship voyages begin and end with rites. Not simple ones, either. We're talking full purification protocols, sacred oils, chants led by silent choir priests. Some accounts suggest that even the navigators themselves must undergo psychic fasting, isolating from the warp for days before guiding the ship. It's not just travel, it's a pilgrimage of containment. There's even talk that the black ships don't use standard warp routes, that they've carved out old, lost lanes through the immaterium, channels that no other ship dares to tread. Forgotten roads only remembered by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, mapped not by star charts, but by psychic echoes and ancient terror. That's why so many of these vessels never appear in fleet records. Why they seem to bypass patrols, avoid interference, and arrive in orbit like ghosts. They aren't just avoiding attention. They're moving through another layer of the galaxy, one most of the Imperium never sees. And of course, there's the fear. Even within the Imperium, among its highest ranks, there's a kind of unspoken dread surrounding the black ship's travel. I've read accounts from fleet admirals who refused to station their ships near them, who demanded that black ships use separate docks, separate Vox channels. There's this sense that contact with them, prolonged contact, can stain a crew, curse a vessel. And honestly, I don't think it's superstition. I think it's instinct. Because here's the thing no one likes to say out loud. The black ships aren't just transporting Psykers. They're transporting a massive, unstable mass of raw warp energy, constantly bubbling beneath the surface. Thousands of human minds, terrified, leaking panic, pain, and dreams into the immaterium. It's like carrying a sea of psychic fuel and daring the galaxy not to spark a match. That's why their navigators are so heavily controlled, why their jumps are layered in prayer. It's not just about reaching Terra, it's about surviving the path there. Some fan theories go even deeper, arguing that the navigators assigned to black ships aren't volunteers, but chosen from specific bloodlines. That there are whole branches of the Navis Nobilite bred only for this duty. Not because they're the best, but because they're the most expendable. Or worse, because they're the most tolerant of suffering. There's even a theory that some navigators aboard black ships are partially lobotomized. Not fully, but just enough to dull their emotional responses. So they don't scream when the warp looks back. And then there's the religious aspect. The ecclesiarchy has always treated psychic travel with suspicion, even disgust. But with black ships, their involvement takes a more formal, ritualized form. Some records mention penitents stationed aboard, not to guide or control, but to absorb, to spiritually cleanse the ship by their presence. Walking reliquaries, mind-wiped martyrs who hum sacred verses to balance out the psychic stench of the cargo. They don't speak, they don't sleep, they just endure. And when the ship arrives at Terra, they're burned in silence. It's easy to think of all this as exaggerated, as the kind of Baroque madness Warhammer is known for. But if you've ever truly tried to imagine a black ship's voyage, not just the distance, but the weight of what it's carrying, you start to get why these measures exist. Why even among navigators, serving aboard one is seen as a death sentence. Or worse, a living one. And maybe that's what makes these vessels so terrifying. Not just that they cross space differently. Not just that they carry screams through the stars, but that they remind us how fragile everything is. That in the name of survival, even navigation has become ritualized horror. That every jump is a gamble, every journey a trial. And still, the ships keep moving, always toward Terra, always carrying their burden. Because the Imperium doesn't stop, it can't. Not even when the road it travels is paved with blood, silence, and the kind of fear that even the warp seems to respect. If you ever start pulling on the threads behind the black ships, really digging into who runs them, who signs the orders, who's watching from the shadows, you'll eventually run into the name Adeptus Astra Telepathica. And honestly, that name alone doesn't do justice to what they really are. They're not just an administrative body. They're not just a guild of sanctioned psychers or a branch of imperial oversight. They're the ones holding the leash on humanity's most dangerous mutation. And that leash? It's wrapped in chains of secrecy, fear, and absolute control. Most fans know the Adeptus Astra Telepathica as the organization responsible for training sanctioned psychers. That part's not a mystery. They're the ones who sort the useful from the useless after the psycher harvest reaches Terra. They're the ones who stamp the seals, brand the flesh, and whisper into the ears of the Inquisition and the High Lords. But what a lot of people overlook is that they don't just manage psychers. They're the architects of the entire system that makes the black ships possible. The collection, the processing, the training, the sacrifice, it all goes through them. These ships don't move unless the Astra Telepathica allows it. And what's even wilder is how independent they are. In a galaxy full of overlapping authorities, where even a simple decision might need blessing from a dozen different organizations, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica moves in the shadows. They report directly to the Senatorum Imperialis, sure, but their day-to-day operations? Completely autonomous. They don't need to clear things with the Adeptus Administratum. They don't have to check in with the ecclesiarchy, even when what they're doing crosses deep into the spiritual realm. That kind of freedom is almost unheard of in the Imperium. And that tells you just how serious psycher management is. How essential, how delicate. Some fans compare them to the Inquisition, and I get the logic. Both are feared, both operate above traditional law, both deal in threats that can't be allowed to spread. But the Inquisition hunts corruption. The Astra Telepathica controls the very tools the Imperium needs to function. That's a different kind of power. It's not flashy. It's not loud. It's the kind that sits in a sealed chamber, quietly approving the list of psychers who will die to feed the Golden Throne next week. And yes, the black ships fall squarely under their jurisdiction. From what's been pieced together in the lore, these vessels are crewed by a strange mix of sanctioned psychers, nulls, telepathic handlers, sisters of silence, and even navigators trained in-house. But all of it, the funding, the schedules, the selection of worlds, goes back to the Astra Telepathica. They decide when a world's population of Psykers becomes ripe. They issue the command. They send the ship. What really gets me is how little they communicate with the rest of the Imperium. I've read accounts where planetary governors didn't even know a black ship was coming until it was already in orbit. No warning, no coordination, just a transmission from orbit, cold and final. Prepare the Psyker tithe. That's not cooperation, that's dominance. And in a way, it makes sense. You can't risk local authorities hiding Psykers, or trying to resist, or asking questions they're not supposed to. The entire process only works if it's insulated, untouchable. And then there's the mystery of how the Astra Telepathica itself is structured. We know they train astropaths. We know they oversee the Scholastia Psychana. But beyond that, it's murky. A lot of fans believe the inner workings are deliberately obscured, even to other Imperial bodies. There might be whole branches no one talks about, secret academies, research labs buried beneath Terra or hidden among the stars. Places where they don't just train Psykers, they test them, push them, break them. Some of the more fringe theories suggest that the Adeptus Astra Telepathica is sitting on knowledge from the dark age of technology, that they've inherited psychic methodologies from a time when humanity wasn't afraid of the warp, but used it with confidence. And if that's true, then maybe that's why they're allowed so much freedom. Maybe the High Lords understand that what the Astra Telepathica is doing isn't just logistics, it's containment of ancient apocalyptic knowledge. And of course, this all feeds into the fear, not just of the black ships, but of the organization behind them. On many worlds, the name Astra Telepathica is never even spoken. They're referred to in euphemisms. The Watchers, the Quiet Order, the Mind Lords. People know they exist, and they know not to interfere. Because once the black ship is in orbit, all local law ceases to matter. The moment they land, they own the Psykers, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop them. What's even more chilling is that they seem to prefer it this way. The Astra Telepathica doesn't want public recognition, doesn't seek glory. You never hear about them leading armies, winning crusades, standing before crowds. They operate like a nervous system, silent, essential, invisible. And that, to me, is a kind of horror all its own. Because when an organization that powerful chooses to remain in the background, it means they're not doing it for fame. They're doing it because what they handle is too dangerous for the spotlight. And yet, we need them. The Imperium needs them. For every astropathic choir, for every successful psychic broadcast, for every sanctioned Psyker who doesn't explode mid-battlefield, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica is behind it. And yes, for every 1,000 Psykers sacrificed to the Golden Throne, they are the ones keeping the flame alive. So when I think about the black ships, I don't just see cold metal and prison cells. I see the long fingers of a quiet empire, reaching across the stars to snatch what it needs. I see the silent order that holds back the warp, not with faith or bolt guns, but with bureaucracy, ritual, and brutal efficiency. And worst of all, I see how well it works. The black ships are terrifying enough on their own, void black coffins slicing through the warp, loaded with thousands of Psykers and the silent promise of sacrifice. But if you've ever stopped to wonder who actually works on these ships, who maintains the systems, who guards the prisoners, who walks those haunted halls day in and day out, that's where the real nightmare begins. Because the truth is, no one really knows. And what we do think we know, it's a collection of whispers, chilling fragments, and fan theories that paint a picture far worse than any official record ever could. Most sources agree on one thing: the black ships are crude, but not like normal Imperial vessels. You won't find a proud captain giving orders on the bridge or smiling deck officers chatting in mess halls. These aren't Navy vessels. They don't run on camaraderie or rank. They run on silence, obedience, and purpose. Every member of the crew is there because they have to be. Or worse, because there's nowhere else for them to go. One of the most persistent theories among fans is that a portion of the crew is made up of failed Psykers. Those who were once collected by a black ship, deemed too unstable for service but too valuable to kill outright. Instead of being offered to the Golden Throne, they're broken, mentally crushed, chemically dulled, surgically altered. Their powers stripped down to harmless embers, and then they're assigned to the very ships that once caged them. forced to serve as handlers, wardens, or worse. Just living warning signs to the Psykers in the cells. Look what you could become. There's something especially cruel about that idea. That a person could survive the harvest, survive the journey, only to become part of the system that destroyed them. Some fans speculate these individuals don't even speak anymore, that they've had their tongues cut or their vocal cords cauterized, not out of malice, but because any uncontrolled psychic outburst, even a word, could set off a chain reaction. They don't need to talk. They just move like shadows, silent, obedient, numb. And then there are the Sisters of Silence. Their presence aboard the black ships isn't just confirmed, it's essential. As blanks or pariahs, their very existence suppresses psychic activity. A single sister in a room can reduce even a powerful psyker to a gibbering wreck. Imagine what a squad of them could do walking the halls of a ship filled with untrained psykers. They are the ever-present threat. The reason no one dares to lash out. They don't have to touch you. Just standing near you is enough to crush your mind into submission. But even among the sisters, those assigned to black ships are different, hardened, detached. There's fan speculation that they are the most extreme of their kind, sisters who no longer speak, even among themselves. Who've served on the ships so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to hear another's thoughts, or even their own. Some theories say they never leave the ship, that they are permanently stationed, bound by oath or penance, that they sleep in standing tombs, waking only when the ship approaches a world or when a psyker starts to stir. There's also this theory I love, well, love in the grimdark sense, that parts of the crew are made up of servitors, but not the usual kind. These aren't just lobotomized tech thralls. These are psychic servitors. Failed psykers whose bodies were repurposed, their minds scrubbed clean, turned into living conduits for detection or suppression. They line the walls of the ship like cables, humming softly with null energy, wired into the ship's systems like forgotten relics. They don't move, they don't breathe, but they feel. You pass them in the corridor, and your thoughts go static. Your dreams feel cold. They're part of the architecture now. And what about command? Who leads a black ship? That's where the mystery really deepens. There are no known names, no heroic figures. Some fans believe the ships are led by high-ranking members of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, telepaths so strong and so mentally armored that they can resist the collective psychic pressure of the entire ship. Others say there is no central command, that the ships operate like autonomous cells with decentralized leadership to prevent any single point of failure. Even darker theories suggest that the ships are run by artificial intelligences, not in the traditional sense, since AI is strictly forbidden, but by some ancient form of sanctioned machine thought from the dark age of technology. A half-conscious system, psychically attuned, that maintains the ship's functions without emotion or bias. It doesn't care who you are. It only knows what needs to be done. It drifts from world to world like an automated reaper, harvesting psykers without pause or judgment. There's also talk of ghost crew phenomena. Stories from fan writers and lore snippets about strange figures seen walking the halls, shadows that don't belong to anyone, voices heard in sealed rooms. Some believe that the warp's influence, combined with the psychic trauma saturating the ship, leaves permanent imprints. That over time, the ship becomes haunted, not by demons, but by echoes. Residual emotions of the thousands who've died within its walls. And the crew? They just live with it. They don't exorcise. They don't cleanse. They endure. What makes all of this so compelling is how little is officially confirmed. It's deliberate. The mystery is part of the horror. The idea that even among the most lore-obsessed fans, no one really knows who keeps the lights on in these ships, who mops the blood off the floor, who wakes up every day, looks at a ship full of doomed psykers, and chooses to keep going. That's the kind of existential dread Warhammer does best, because it makes you realize something. The black ships aren't just machines. They're ecosystems, self-contained nightmares that require an entire cast of the broken, the silenced, and the damned to function. And whether they serve by choice, by punishment, or by programming, one thing is clear: they're never getting off that ship. Here's the part that really keeps me up at night. Not the harvesting, not the sacrifice, not even the silence of the black ships themselves. It's the ones that never come back. Because for all the grim structure and brutal efficiency the Imperium tries to project, the truth is this: not every black ship reaches Terra. Some vanish. No signals, no debris, just gone. Swallowed by the warp, devoured by something we don't even have the words to describe. And worse, no one talks about them. They just disappear from the records like they were never there to begin with. It's not even rare. If you dig deep enough, if you trawl through obscure data slates or offhand remarks buried in old novels, you start to notice a pattern. Missing vessels, lost routes, Psyker tides suddenly cancelled without explanation. And every now and then a high-ranking astropath quietly reassigned, a handler quietly executed. The Imperium buries its failures deep, but the warp doesn't forget. And the black ships that vanish into it, they become something else entirely. The simplest explanation, and probably the most common, is warp-related disaster. Even with navigators, even with layers of ritual and psychic suppression, the warp is still the most dangerous place imaginable. You're sailing a coffin full of screaming psychers through a storm of daemons and nightmares. One surge of emotion, one uncontrolled mind flare, 1 second of distraction. That's all it takes for a hole to tear open and reality to bleed. There are stories of ships caught in psychic chain reactions, where one psyker loses control and drags the others with them. An emotional implosion that turns the vessel into a beacon for the worst things lurking in the immaterium. But some of the fan theories go way deeper. There's this idea I've always found fascinating, and honestly, horrifying, that some black ships don't get lost accidentally. They go dark on purpose. Maybe the crew realizes something's wrong. A psyker on board too powerful to control. A breach already forming. Or maybe they discover something they're not supposed to know. And rather than risk bringing that back to Terra, they cut contact. They dive deeper into the warp. They self-exile. They erase themselves. A final act of loyalty or desperation. Then there are the really dark theories. The ones that suggest not all disappearances are sacrifices. That some of these ships are taken, not destroyed, not consumed, but intercepted, corrupted, repurposed. There are whispers that chaos doesn't just feed on psychers, it recruits them. That somewhere out there in the deepest warp, there are black ships turned blacker. Vessels once bound for Terra now serving something else entirely. Their psyker cargo twisted into cults of pain and power, their crews possessed or driven mad, whole ships acting as mobile altars to the dark gods. There's one fan story I read years ago that stuck with me. It wasn't official lore, but the vibe was perfect. A black ship called the Veil of Aegis goes missing en route from the Jericho Reach. Months later, fragments of its signals start echoing across nearby sectors. Warped, backward, filled with screams and what sounded like chanting in a dead dialect of Low Gothic. A rogue trader intercepts a piece of the hull floating in real space, covered in symbols no one can translate. The ship never returns. But sightings of a black silhouette, half merged with the warp, trailing a wake of psychic distortion, begin to spread through the edges of Imperial space. Some say it still hunts psychers, not to deliver them to Terra, but to feed itself. And then there's the question no one really wants to ask. What if some of the ships don't want to come back? I know that sounds insane, but hear me out. The psychers on board are broken. Yes, but not all of them. Some are strong enough to survive, maybe even strong enough to dominate, to bend the others. The crew is silent, ritualistic, isolated from the wider Imperium. The warp is always whispering. What happens when a psyker, 1 in a million, reaches out and listens? What happens when a ship becomes a throne? Some fans believe there are rogue black ships out there. Not chaos corrupted, not lost, just free. Crewed by psychers who survived the journey and realized they didn't need to die on Terra, that they had power, that they had an entire ship. Maybe they fled, maybe they created something new. Not a rebellion, not an army, just a pocket of impossible survivors, refusing to be cogs in the Imperium's machine. But even if none of that is true, even if every vanished ship is just another casualty of warp travel, there's still the silence, the lack of answers. And in the Imperium, silence is never innocent. Every missing black ship is a story untold, a hole in the map, a question no one wants to answer. And that's what gets under my skin the most, not knowing. We have no idea how many black ships are out there right now, drifting beyond Imperial reach. No idea how many Psykers vanished with them. No idea what those Psykers might have become. Could be ghosts, could be daemons, could be kings. All we know is this. When a black ship doesn't return, no one investigates. No fleets are dispatched, no memorials are held. It's just crossed off the list, forgotten, and maybe that's the scariest fate of all. Not to die, not to burn, but to vanish. To become part of the whispering dark. There's this feeling I can't shake when I think about the Black ships. Not just dread, not just horror, but something deeper. A kind of existential wrongness. Like we're looking at a system so dark, so morally inverted, that the only way it can function is by hiding itself completely. And that's what makes them so terrifying. Not the shape of the ships or even the fate of the Psykers on board, but the deliberate, constructed silence around everything they really do. Because if the Imperium ever told the full truth about the black ships, if it ever opened up those vaults and showed us what really goes on inside, it would collapse under the weight of its own cruelty. Most of the official records are scrubbed. What we know is always filtered through layers of dogma, censorship, and carefully crafted half-truths. We're told it's necessary. We're told Psykers are dangerous. We're told they're being processed, trained, evaluated. But those words don't capture what's really happening. The black ships are mobile temples of pain, of control, of sacrificial logistics wrapped in iron and secrecy. And beneath all that machinery, there are rituals, real ones. Not just liturgical fluff, but actual rites performed aboard these vessels. Not to bless them, not to guide them, to bind them, to contain what's inside. There are consistent whispers, echoes in obscure texts, and plenty of fan speculation that the black ships require psychic rituals before and during every voyage. Not just to protect against warp breaches, but to calm the Psykers. Some believe these involve massive psychic dampening fields powered by unwilling participants. Others say it's even darker. That some Psykers are selected as keys before departure. Hooked into the ship's systems as living anchors, forced into trance states to stabilize the minds of the others through forced psychic resonance. Think of it like a choir where the conductor is bleeding through their eyes. And then there's the sacrifice. We know about the 1,000 Psykers a day fed into the Golden Throne, but that's just the final step. There are rumors that sacrifices happen long before the ship ever reaches Terra. That some Psykers are ritually killed during transit to maintain control, to feed wards, or even to fulfill quotas that no one talks about. One theory says that when a ship gets too unstable, when psychic pressure builds to a dangerous level, they perform something called a soul bleed. They pick a group of Psykers, usually the weakest, and purge them in a synchronized act of ritual execution. Not for punishment, for balance. I've seen fans talk about these practices with this weird mix of revulsion and fascination because they know, deep down, it works. The Imperium survives because of this horror. But the question no one really wants to ask is, at what cost? Because when your civilization runs on blood and fear, how long before it becomes something inhuman? There's also strong belief among lore enthusiasts that the Adeptus Astra Telepathica uses the black ships not just for collection, but for experimentation. Not sanctioned, not official, but hidden. We're talking psychic augmentation trials, warp resistance tests, even controlled daemon host exposure. Think about it. What better place to run psychic experiments than a flying prison full of unwanted Psykers, completely cut off from the rest of the Imperium? If something goes wrong, no one finds out. If something succeeds, you have a new weapon or a new method for control. And the Psykers? No one misses them. No one even knows their names. Some fan theories go further and suggest that certain black ships are outfitted specifically for this kind of work, that they never even go to Terra. They operate in remote sectors, gathering Psykers for private research divisions hidden deep within the Astra Telepathica. Ships like the Vigilant Silence or the Riftward Chain, names that pop up in rumors, mentioned in passing in apocryphal texts, then disappear again. These ships don't just vanish in the warp. They vanish from reality because they were never meant to be seen in the first place. There's also the creeping fear that some of these secrets aren't just sanctioned, they're protected by the Inquisition. Or worse, shared with them. We know the Ordo Hereticus has interests in Psyker management. We know they've intervened in cases of psychic corruption. But what if they're more involved than that? What if some of the more ambitious inquisitors have their own black ship agendas? Experiments to create more stable psychers, or more destructive ones. And then there's the moral side of it all. The part that hits you after all the lore, all the theories, all the grim numbers. What does it say about a civilization that does this? Not just once, not as a wartime emergency, but forever? Systematically, without remorse. Psychers are born, psychers are taken, psychers are burned. Every year, every decade, every century. And no one stops it. No one even tries. Because in the Imperium's eyes, it's not evil. It's maintenance. I've seen people say that the black ships are the heart of the Imperium's survival. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe the real horror isn't that these secrets exist. It's that they've been normalized. That the system is so vast, so ancient, that no one remembers how to question it. The screams are background noise. The rituals are just steps on a checklist. The experiments? Acceptable losses. And that's what truly chills me. The black ships aren't just tools. They're reflections of what the Imperium has become. A place where hope has been replaced with efficiency, where lives are measured in usefulness and suffering is just another kind of currency. There's no redemption in these vessels, no hidden kindness, only silence, steel, and secrets so old they've become tradition. So, after everything we've uncovered, everything we've wandered through, the fear, the silence, the rituals, the losses, it's no surprise that the black ships remain one of the most haunting, morally brutal aspects of the entire Warhammer 40k universe. And in a galaxy filled with daemons, exterminatus, and planet-breaking weapons, that's really saying something. Because the horror of the black ships isn't flashy. It doesn't come with bolter fire or warp rifts or chaos iconography. It comes with the quiet, methodical way they operate. The precision of pain, the normalization of terror. It's the slow grind of a machine that's been running for so long, no one remembers how to stop it, only how to feed it. What makes the black ships so disturbing isn't just what they do, it's that their existence feels logical in this universe. Necessary, even. And that hits in a completely different way. You want to be horrified, but part of you can't argue with the reason they exist. Psychers are dangerous. The warp is worse. Humanity needs order. The Emperor must be sustained. All true. But then you see how that logic plays out. 1,000 Psychers a day fed into a chair. An entire fleet of ghost ships roaming the stars, plucking the gifted and the cursed alike from their homes. Lives reduced to fuel, rituals, and silence. And still, there's no real villain here. That's the terrifying part. The black ships aren't manned by sadists or maniacs. They're not joyfully evil. They're just doing their job. The Sisters of Silence? They don't speak, don't gloat. The handlers? Emotionless. The psychers who survive? Resigned. The ships aren't dripping with chaos, corruption, or guided by heretics. They are purely imperial, utterly loyal, completely necessary. And somehow, that makes them so much worse. When you start looking deeper, when you stop just seeing them as background set dressing in the lore and really begin to think about what they are, it forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the Imperium. This isn't a noble empire holding back the night. It's a decaying machine that survives by feeding on its own. The black ships are the arteries of that machine, pumping not blood, but fear and souls. They remind us that in Warhammer 40k, hope is a weakness, mercy is treason, and survival means learning to live with the unthinkable. And yet, that's why I love this setting so much. Because even in the darkest corners, like the black ships, you find complexity. You find the weight of history, of ritual, of necessity. You find stories that stick with you, not because they're loud, but because they whisper truths that feel too real. What does it mean to trade morality for survival? How much horror are we willing to ignore as long as the system still functions? These aren't just questions for 40k. These are questions for us. A lot of fans talk about the grimdark aesthetic, the epic battles, the monstrous gods, but the black ships show us something else entirely. The horror of bureaucracy, of obedience, of systems built not to save lives, but to manage death. And that, in my opinion, is why they deserve more attention. They're not flashy. They're not heroic. They're just quietly, relentlessly awful. And they keep going, day after day, year after year, ship after ship. That's the true heartbeat of the Imperium, slow, cold, and unmerciful. So yeah, next time someone asks you what the darkest part of 40k is, don't say chaos. Don't say the Tyranids. Tell them about the black ships. Tell them about the harvest, about the silence, about the Psykers who scream in their dreams and the crews who never speak again. Tell them about the quiet ships that vanish into the warp, never to return. Tell them about the ones that do, and what they bring with them. If you've made it this far, thanks for taking this journey with me. I know this wasn't an easy topic. It's one of the bleakest in the whole setting, but I think it's important. I think these are the kinds of stories that make Warhammer more than just bolters and battlefields. These are the stories that linger. If you enjoyed this dive into one of the Imperium's most chilling secrets, and you want more deep, lore-driven content like this, from the weird, the forgotten, and the horrifying corners of the galaxy, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's always more to explore and a lot more darkness to uncover. Until next time, stay vigilant, question everything, and if you ever see a black ship on the horizon, don't run. It's already too late. And if you're into this kind of deep dive, grimdark storytelling, where we peel back the layers of the Imperium's most secretive horrors and explore the lore that usually hides between the lines, don't forget to like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me keep digging into the darkest corners of Warhammer 40k. And trust me, there's so much more waiting beneath the surface. Hit the bell so you never miss an upload. And if you've got a theory about the black ships, or maybe a favorite twisted piece of lore no one talks about, let me know below. Thanks for watching, and as always, trust in the Emperor, but never trust the silence.